I remember being in high school and getting back the results of my exams. When I received mine, I realized I had failed physics, failed math, and failed chemistry. Back then, every single assignment or exam that I wrote got me a pretty shitty grade. I also remember just how disappointed my parents would be each time I got my report card back. And because of this shitty performance that I had for most of my school life, I thought I was this dumb person who could do nothing right. And I would probably end up being a loser. I was just deeply insecure about my level of competence. This led to a bunch of other problems, such as crippling social anxiety. I always thought that everyone was just looking at me and judging me and thinking what a loser I am. Once I was done with high school, people were naturally talking about the kind of universities they're applying to. And these were all fancy universities in the West. But my grades were so bad that I knew I had no shot at applying to a pretty good university. And I would always feel left out when this discussion of universities popped up. So I ended up going to a local university in Oman. This is the place where I had lived for most of my life. And the university there did not really have a very strict cutoff. It would pretty much accept most people that applied, unless you were like a complete idiot. Another interesting thing was that this was the university where my mother worked. Despite everything looking bad on paper, right, not going to a fancy university, having your mother work there, joining this university was the single biggest point of change in my life. I was pursuing a degree in electrical engineering, and I remember walking into my first lecture. Now, because this university pretty much just accepted anyone that applied, let's just say that the average person in that classroom was not the brightest person. And the lectures were also fairly easy. Now, something kind of strange started happening. Because of the easier syllabus and the added pressure that I cannot screw up because my mother works here and she's going to hear about it, I was for once able to absorb what was being taught in the classroom. And when the professor was asking questions, I was the one answering them. And this phenomenon was so strange to me. And I remember a feeling I had after this first class. I thought to myself that maybe I'm not a complete loser. Maybe I'm not that good for nothing idiot. On that day, I became so addicted to this feeling of not feeling like a loser. So now before every single lecture, I would study the notes in advance, just so I could raise my hand and answer the questions and look smart in front of other people. Like, honestly, this was my intention back then. I know it's pretty superficial, but just doing this thing of preparing for classes beforehand, being involved in class discussions, raising my hand and answering questions, this changed how I started viewing myself. That glass ceiling of me being a dumb loser, it began to crack. I was now beginning to feel like perhaps I'm a bit smart. And this change in self-belief is vital. Back in high school when I thought I was dumb, I could actually sit down with my math notes all day long and still absorb nothing because it was limited by my own self-belief. I had subconsciously told myself that this thing is beyond me, and your brain makes sure that the beliefs that you hold about yourself are true. So this became like a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now when I actually changed my self-image and began thinking that I'm a bit smart, my brain now began to reaffirm that self-belief. I was now able to absorb complex ideas much faster. And you know what the best part was? This newly installed self-belief I had held me even once I went to a better university in the West to do my masters, which was actually challenging. And just a couple of years ago, I used to think of this self-image stuff as wishy-washy nonsense. But it is now that I understand how much of an impact your self-belief has on your actions. It was during the earlier semesters of university that I came across Jordan Peterson, and I was quite impressed with him, how articulate he was and how much he knew about a wide range of topics. And I remember watching one of his videos about just how important a young person's time really is. He spoke about how the average university student was wasting 6 to 10 hours a day, doing absolutely pointless things. And if you were getting paid a minimum wage of, let's say, $20 for each of these hours, then you were losing about $200 a day. Also because you're young and you can probably use this time to learn new in-demand skills that would triple the value of your time to around $60 an hour. That meant that you were actually losing close to $500 a day. This sort of quantification of time into money left such a deeply lasting impression on me. Because previously throughout my high school life, I thought of time as something that is abundant and has no real value at all. And when you think of time this way, then you naturally begin to start wasting it. Now when I thought of time differently in terms of money, that hey, I could be learning a new skill that could allow me to earn $500 a day. Now all of a sudden time began to feel incredibly valuable to me, and I would start feeling guilty if I found myself wasting it. Any free time that I had now would go towards studying my university lectures or watching some informative documentary on YouTube or learning more about electronics engineering, and this began to feel really good. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment from what other people would consider as nerd stuff. I remember I delved so deep into microcontrollers, which are pretty much like the brain of electronic devices. I ended up creating a color detector and a portable distance monitor, spending my time just creating these projects and other people telling me that how cool these projects really were. This once again further boosted my self-image that yeah, I am now someone who's actually smart. So now I was no longer interested in just throwing away my time. I was now interested in making the most out of my time. The biggest difference between me back in high school and me in university was the type of pleasure that I was chasing. Back in high school, my life centered around the pursuit of instant pleasure. Facebook used to be a thing back then, and I used to spend hours on it just browsing, even though I really didn't have many friends. I was just making dumb status updates and liking my own pictures. The food that I was eating back then was once again all about pleasure. I was drinking soda, eating chips, binging on McDonald's. I was also watching porn and binge watching shows. Because back then, I knew of no other way to have fun other than numbing myself out with quick fleeting pleasure. And when you get so used to this quick instant pleasure, then you sort of lose your ability to do hard work. This is why I never really could study and my grades were bad and I developed a bunch of social anxiety. But in university, I got my first taste of a very different kind of pleasure. This was delayed pleasure. When I worked hard on a project or an assignment and I finally saw it working or saw myself receiving like an A+ grade, I felt a genuine sense of long-lasting happiness. When I started hitting the gym and a couple of months later, I saw my bicep grow just by an inch. That too gave me a sense of progression and fulfillment. And when I finally understood that, okay, I can get a sense of fulfillment if I just do some amount of work towards a few things, that is when I decided to quit all forms of temporary pleasures and replace them with delayed gratification. And you know what the biggest difference between instant pleasure and delayed pleasure is? That instant pleasure does not even exist outside your head. When you eat shitty food, smoke weed, or watch porn, you have just received a dopamine dump in your head without a single thing in the outside world changing that justifies this dopamine dump. And this is why these things are so dangerous and addictive. Whereas when you do something that gives you delayed pleasure, maybe you've spent 3 hours studying that day, there is a very real consequence to this effort. Your grade is going to improve in the real world. When you have worked out and you feel good about yourself, there is a consequence attached to that. Your health is going to get better, you are going to get stronger, your physique is going to look better. That pleasure that you have received is earned and justified, and the world is giving it to you. So when I was doing all these activities like studying, working out, reading books, building projects, I was in real time changing my external reality, and people took notice of the kind of man that I was becoming. My parents were now actually proud of me, and people actually valued my company. Like, they would come to me with their assignments and projects and ask me, Jibreel, what do you think of this or that? And then people would ask me to join their groups. For once I felt like I was wanted somewhere. You know, back in high school, my room was always a mess. My notes were always disorganized or lost. Most days I would wake up without any form of a plan or structure to my day. Everything was just chaotic, and every action that I did was just out of pure impulse or emotion. Now looking back at this life, I realized that when you have no organization or direction to your life, then you just feel like a leaf floating through the wind. You're just a slave to your most immediate desires and you don't really reach a destination. But things took a drastic turn in university. And one of the biggest changes that I made was that I started cleaning my room. My desk was clean, my cupboard was organized, and my bed was made. And this made a crazy amount of difference in my psyche. Now my thoughts felt a lot more linear and organized. Whereas when I had a messy room, my thoughts were messy too. It's almost as if your environment is a representation of your internal dialogue. So make sure that you have an organized room if you want an organized headspace. The next big change that I made in university was that I was now living my life based on a routine. I now had a rough idea what I was going to do once I woke up. I knew that each morning I was going to spend about 2 to 3 hours just studying. I knew that each afternoon I would be hitting the gym, and later in the evening I would be watching a podcast or reading a book. And I knew exactly what time I would be going to the bed. Having some form of a structure is infinitely better than having no structure at all. And the structure would not have to be perfect, and you might miss a thing or two here and there. But even if you follow your routine 50 to 60% of the time, that is still better than waking up and doing things without a routine. Back in high school, because I had no structure to my life, I would pretty much waste away the entire school year and would only prepare for exams just days before. And you know how that sort of preparation actually goes. You try to memorize stuff you're seeing for the very first time, naturally because of studying studying this way, I would end up performing really poorly in exams. But in university, now that I had a pretty good structure to my day, I was studying nearly 2 to 3 hours first thing in the morning. Now by the time exams showed up, I was on my second or third revision. And it was this structure that also led me to get a good software engineering position. For people who come from a software engineering background, they know how fancy companies decide to have multiple rounds of technical interviews where they give you a bunch of coding problems and test you on a wide range of topics. Because every single hour of my day was structured, I found enough time to spend 1 to 2 hours a day just practicing these interview questions or going through lead code coding problems. And after doing this for a year, I was quite comfortable with these interviews. Perhaps this video has inspired you and you're quite motivated. But just remember that this motivation is a fleeting feeling and would probably go away in the next 5 to 10 minutes. If you truly want to change your life, make sure that you watch this video to learn about long-lasting discipline strategies.